So guys, Siegfried here, welcome. I'm always surprised at the reaction of photographers changing over to Olympus cameras. I find it quite encouraging to see the positive and almost surprise reaction of photographers once they discover the Micro Four Thirds format from Olympus. In this presentation we're going to have a look at why this happens and how Workspace is a sort of a missing link in a complete solution, and why I think Olympus is such a powerful software package in the Olympus ecosystem. We can think of Workspace as the final link. This is an image I took with my OM3. I think it's beautiful, I love it. I like the play with sun and shadows, the sort of bokeh in the background blur. I was using the 12 to 45mm f4 Pro lens from Olympus on my OM3, and the OM3 just makes it so easy to get wonderful results with the camera. This here is an image from my Olympus EM10 20 megapixel camera. Also a lovely camera, I love it. I think it's a fantastic camera. And interestingly, I had the 14 to 42 Mark II kit lens on there, not the pancake style EZ lens, the normal lens. And this particular image, the camera exposed more for the sky and the clouds, and therefore the bottom part is sort of dark. The gamma curve was normal, so I didn't adjust anything on the gamma or the tonal adjustments, and the picture mode was natural picture mode, and I always have my noise filter on the low setting. I selected f16 to get the star effect with the sun. I could have probably done it with f13, but I was a bit in a hurry and I just did it like this. This here is a copy of what we can do in the camera. So I selected the color creator, I used auto gradation, so I started doing tonal or gamma adjustments. I did slight adjustments to the highs and the mids and the lows. I upped the contrast in the camera, which we discussed last week as a destructive setting, but I thought, if I'm interested in the JPEG, then it's okay. And again, I had the low filter on, noise filter on. This is an interesting variation. This is done in Workspace, and instead of the color creator, I used the adjust color tool. Again, auto gradation. I did a little different configuration on the mids, highs and shadows, and I used the tone curve function, the curve function in Workspace, and again the noise filter was on low. Now you can see the slight color changes between the color creator and the adjust color tool. The raw format makes it possible to take advantage of OM3 color profile functions or the PenF or the EP7. So once I open my raw file in Workspace, I have access to the color profile tools in Workspace with the EM10 in this instance. I would have had the same thing with the EM5 Mark II, for example. And then the final image is a HDR, so I took the raw file and I created a HDR version in Affinity. I pushed it a little bit to show what is possible, and I think this would be a lovely painting on the wall, for example. I love it. I think it's awesome, and it looks great in printed format. So we have tremendous freedom with our Olympus cameras and the imaging process happening in the camera, and the raw data, the quality of data that we get or that we can export to Workspace. This is a final image which I think is really fantastic. So on the left you have grass and the background with bokeh. I did it with the OM3, and on the right you have the OM3 in that sort of stream scene there. The quality that that comes out the camera is so unique. And it's not as sharpened or over sharpened. It's just a beautiful, almost analog feel that you get from this camera. It's really a special camera, and the detail is off the charts, if I can put it that way. If you take an image in a shadow area of hair, a lady with beautiful hair, then the detail that is available is mind-blowing sometimes. In this case, if you look to the right here in this grass here, if you zoom in a little, it's amazing how much detail is there. A very interesting aspect of Workspace, I always thought that you would get different results from Workspace for different cameras. So if I edit the raw file from an old EM5, I will not get the same technologies, image quality technologies applied like with the OM3, I thought, So I thought that Workspace would go back in time and would apply what was applicable in the days of the EM5. Well, the surprise is, and I don't have any proof I don't have any proof for that, but from my experience using Workspace extensively, I never see a difference. So I can edit a EM5 Mark II, which already has stunning picture quality. I get a very similar look like I get with the OM3, because the latest image quality technologies has been transferred from the TruePic environment to the current version of Workspace. So I would imagine that the TruePic 10, which is used in the OM1s and the OM3, that is the baseline for the latest version of Workspace. So how does this happen? How is it possible for Olympus to have such an impact on somebody that buys Olympus, a new Olympus camera, and then have that surprise or excitement experience of discovering these cameras? And the secret is, and Olympus mentioned it again and again and again in the press releases, the secret is they never only focused on the sensor. So if you look at this triangle here, you have basically 4 elements. You have the sensor, the TruePic image processor, the lenses, the Zuko technology that they use, and there's so much information to learn about these lenses, and then Workspace, which is more the theme of the day. And they didn't only harmonize the relationship between these 4 elements, they really spent much time on perfecting the solution or the interaction of these 4 components in the quest for perfect or beautiful image quality. I prefer beautiful image quality above perfect image quality. And they use technologies. On the left you can see here, they often mention a fine detail image processing technology. We're on the version 2 currently, or a real color technology that they apply. I believe the baseline Kodak look is always present, but there has been improvements on the actual image quality. So, and then we saw the advanced shadow adjustment, ASAT, which is basically the gradation function, the different composite features, tonal adjustments, high, mids and lows, which is a gamma adjustment, the additional gamma curve or the tonal curve adjustment in Workspace, the high-res modes from the EM5 to the OM3, and even the EM5 with its 40 megapixel high-res mode is so much fun to use. It opens so much opportunities having a 40 megapixel file if you need that. And then the ND filter or the graduated ND filter, which is a newer functions. We will discuss this a little more in the future. And then Olympus often mention advanced noise improvements in the processor, in the TruePic processor, but they always mention the sensor and the TruePic processor together. So when they talk about better image quality or better noise performance or new technologies, they always mention the two things together. What could say that this is actually a team, so the TruePix processor and the sensor forms a unit which is very powerful, but not as powerful in isolation. So the key is to study the press releases. I always say that. Now I can imagine it's a little abstract when you begin, because there is a bit of a language in the press releases. They really wanted to share information, but they had to be so careful, because social media experts sometimes come to incorrect conclusions, studying the press releases. So it's a sort of a thing of you learning how to read these press releases. Now, something interesting here, this was the first OMD camera, the EM5, and here they say they have a new 16 megapixel LightMOS sensor with half the noise compared to the previous model. So the previous model was the EP3, and it already had a new sensor. So here we have half the noise. So when they talk about the sensor, they don't talk about the role of the TruePix processor. They're talking about the sensor. That tells me that the read noise, the temporal and dark noise of the sensor has been halved. That means this AST point is moving down here, is now sitting here, and the shot noise is also moving down. So my SNR and the maximum SNR is increased, and the dynamic range is increasing, because this line here is moving down a little bit. And you would say you will see they also mention an increase in dynamic range with the EM5. So another very interesting comment here is the excellent noise reduction capability enables still image shooting sensitivity as high as 25/600. So what do we learn from that? So they're telling us something here, but not directly. You have to have some understanding of digital cameras and how it works to really see what they're telling you here. So the sensitivity of the sensor is a combination of the optical efficiency and the quantum efficiency. Quantum efficiency, the ability of the sensor to convert photons to electrons, how efficient the sensor is in doing that. And this brings us to a very interesting concept of having pro level high sensitivity sensors or more budget type sensors. So you might have the same format, like micro four thirds in this case, with different performing sensors. In the one case you have a more pro level, and in the other case you might have a budget level sensor. Nothing wrong, there's a purpose for each one of these. They're telling us here that this is a high sensitivity sensor that's been selected for this camera, and they're telling it by upping the ISO, the maximum ISO level. Now, how much light is reaching the sensor at this crazy ISO setting? So at 12,000 we're already 6 stops higher than the 200 level, the ISO 200. At 25,600 we're 7 stops higher. Now, in most daylight conditions, it means I was in a very dark place. There was very little light. Very little light on the sensor means I'm operating at this level here, right here at the bottom here of the photons to electrons curve. And this is the area which tells us much about the sensor. So if I'm really in shadows or evening or early morning wildlife photography, I want this area to be very effective. And a high sensitivity sensor, in other words, the capability of converting as much as possible photons to electrons, is critical in this area here. A budget sensor in this area will produce a lot of shadow noise. And this is the combination of halving the noise floor, or having half the noise floor of the previous camera and lowering the AST point, which gives me a higher dynamic range, plus a high sensitivity sensor, optimize this area tremendously. And you see this statement with so many of these OMD cameras. In fact, my perception from what I can read from the different press releases is all the OMDs, that means the EM5s and the EM1s, have high sensitivity sensors. I'm not, I need to read or study the EM10 press release, but I think it's a more leaning more towards the budget sensor side, format, whereas the EM5s and the EM1s definitely all have high sensitivity sensors. This include the OM1 and the OM3. So another interesting one is the EM1, and again we see the highest ever Olympus image quality. So they're really focusing on the point that we have a superb image quality from this camera with again a new 16 megapixel camera plus the TruePix 7 processor. So obviously the new sensor in combination with a TruePix processor made it possible for them to get this level of image quality. The image quality is determined by 3 components, they say: the lens, the image sensor, and the image processor. Here you can now see this concept developing of it's not only the sensor, there are other components, very important components in play. To realize best image quality, advancement of all these elements as well as attention to detail must be achieved. So they really tune every aspect of the image quality chain, if you can call it that. So the new 16 megapixel sensor that makes up on-chip face detection. Okay, they're talking about focusing here. I want to focus a little bit more here. The LiveMore sensor improves decoloration that tended to occur at high sensitivities. I think we're talking again about the fact that this is a high sensitivity sensor from what we discussed in the previous slide. And then the TruePix 6, the original image processing technology fine detail has evolved to fine detail 2 for proper correction of magnification, chromatic aberration that differs depending on each lens movement and applies to appropriate sharpness processing according to the lens type and aperture value for natural high quality resolution. So they give us a lot of information. No low pass filter, for example, replacing that with software. That happened from, I think it was from the EM1 onwards. There's a lot of information here telling us about this camera. And then the final 2 here that I want to highlight is the EM13. So now we know the EM12, the EM1X and the EM13 all have the same sensor. In fact, the OM5s also use this exact same sensor. It's been a wonderful sensor. There's so much positive about this sensor, and it's clear that it's also a high sensitivity sensor. Olympus was a little bit more careful to quote noise improvements and things like that. They did mention the sensitivity line, which shows us that the shadow performance should be quite good. So I want to close with the EM1 Mark III. The combination between the TruePix 9 and this particular sensor was the sweet spot for this particular range. I think it made such a difference. I never expected it to be. So I kept my OM12 for quite some time, and then right at the end of 2021, OM System had a special on the Mark III, and I took that. I was so surprised to see the difference as a camera in terms of performance and image quality between the two, the Mark II and the Mark III. So I can only highly recommend, if you want to experience computational photography features with brilliant image quality at a budget price, try and get a Mark III. Now this one here, the OM3, caused a real stir in the marketplace because, how could a inferior sensor format produce such fantastic results? And how can it be possible for an inferior camera to be priced at just below $2,000, for example? How could OM System do that? And then to make it even worse, they quoted a 2-stop noise performance improvement as well as a 1-stop dynamic range improvement, and the social media expert society went crazy. They couldn't understand or even explain how this was possible. So, and I will end the presentation with a quick summary of why the typical social media expert cannot explain something like the OM3. And then they say here that it is a 3 times faster processor. So I think in the EM5 it was a 3 times quicker processor. They didn't say anything for the TruePix 8 was also 3 times quicker. The 9 has nothing, so they didn't say anything about the speed of the 9, whereas now with the 10 they listed the 3 times quicker again. The 9, what is interesting is it came from the EM1X, which was a dual TruePix 8 processor configuration, and they took that experience and developed the TruePix 9 from that. So I guess that the processing power is similar to what we had in the EM1X, but the clocking speed, the speed of the processor didn't change. We can explain this. So if we take a little time, we can explain this with the knowledge that we've gathered on digital cameras and from a more theoretical point of view than what the social media expert community uses. So here's an interesting summary. So we're looking at the combination of TruePix imaging, image sensor and firmware. Obviously the lenses is part of this combination here. I put Workspace here in this area here. I didn't list anything about the sensor here, of the lens here. So what we see, all these sensors are pro level of high sensitivity sensors on the cameras listed below. And here we have a summary, so 50% less noise and higher dynamic range on the EM5, less noise and better image quality at higher ISOs, which tells us that it's a high sensitivity sensor, pixel level dynamic range improvement. So they talked about in the press release of a pixel level dynamic range improvement. That's again an interesting comment because it shows us that the noise floor is lower. I can only have a pixel level dynamic range improvement if I look at the photons to electrons graph and I lower the noise floor, the read noise floor, so the sensor's noise floor, and then I can achieve a higher dynamic range. Now DxO Mark rated this sensor as one of or the best MFT sensor, MF Micro Four Thirds sensor at the time. And in 2020, the Workspace had received an IA noise filter. So there was always noise improvements or noise technology improvements in the TruePix processor, but we also had the additional AI noise filter with Workspace in 2020, which made contributed to the EM13 being such a fantastic camera. And then we have the new information on the OM3, which is the same camera as the OM1 basically. So the benefits of a carefully engineered solution are really impressive, and we can see it by the image quality, and we also see it when people change over to Olympus cameras. It's clearly visible, the reaction from people. So I say Workspace is the final link in the chain. So they talked about the 3-year, the sensor, the processor, the lenses, and the final link in this chain of perfection, if I may, is then Workspace. So let's have a quick look at Workspace to help you see not so much why it's so unique, but to help you install Workspace and to help you get going with Workspace. So here's a link at the bottom left to OM Workspace, where you will find this page here with some information. It's quite interesting, and also the download link. You need to keep your camera at hand because you need to add the serial number of your camera to be able to download the software. And then have a look at this page here, this one here. As you scroll down, you need to separately download the AI noise software for Workspace. So you install Workspace first, and then thereafter the AI noise part, which gives you the full package then. And here are the cameras which are compatible with the AI noise filter. And interesting, you can see here, these are the cameras which are compatible. And what is important is to remember that the AI noise filter only works from ISO 800 up. So the performance below ISO 800 with a high sensitivity sensor is so good, the built-in filter, noise filter, that you don't really need AI noise reduction. So if you plan to use AI noise reduction, select ISO 800 manually, and then you know that you're safe, that you can do an AI noise filter. Now Workspace is perfect because I have the Olympus lens information programmed into Workspace. I have an absolutely optimized AI noise filter for Olympus cameras. I think it will be very hard to get better results than we can get with Workspace here. And then one final slide that you could have a look at. Where do I find information that can help me? So this here is the window when you open Workspace. And if you go to help on the top here, you will see OM Workspace help. It's a PDF file, it's like a manual, but it's, I guess, only 40 pages, if not less. It's a very basic thing, but very user friendly, and you can learn everything about the functions, about things like this at the bottom here. Everything is explained in this little manual, and it's friendly, it's easy to read, there's not too much information. Highly recommended. Myself, I'd love to help you guys with the basic introduction, how to use Workspace, but I think this presentation showing you why it is so unique and such a unique link or component in the Olympus ecosystem should be quite interesting for you to have a closer look at why the software is so good. Now, just the example, we were doing a photo shoot, my wife and me, this weekend, and she had the EM10 Mark III, which has the awesome TruePix 8 processor in, and she had a 14 to 150 millimeter zoom lens on. I had my EM1 III and the 12 to 42.8 Pro lens on there. A lovely photo shoot we had, and we had lots of fun. And coming home, it was so easy for me to get the same look and feel from these two cameras with Workspace. There was no struggling or battle with colors. There was the image quality is almost similar between the two cameras. Once you've done it in Workspace, you really see the power of the software when you start doing or preparing the images from a photo shoot like this. And we really wanted to give the people a good product, good quality pictures. And it was so easy. I did everything in Workspace. I did nothing in Affinity. So I prepared the complete package in Workspace and gave it to the customer. So it's impossible to evaluate MFT cameras if you don't accept basic principles like all sensors have a noise floor with shot as well as read noise. Read noise comes from the sensor, and shot noise is coming in through the lens from the subject, for example. So every sensor has a noise floor. It's only when you accept this truth that you can start evaluating MFT cameras. The sensor capture data and as part of a larger imaging process. So the imaging is taking place in the processor, not in the sensor. The sensor is capturing data, and we want the sensor to do as good as possible, fast job of capturing data. The image processor converts the sensor. The sensors capture raw data. If you don't accept these basics, it's really impossible to evaluate MFT cameras. Like sensor sensitivity, noise and dynamic range are designed sensor characteristics. It's nothing to do with the size of the sensor. The manufacturing company, like Olympus in this case, selects a specific sensor with a specific design criteria. They want a high sensitivity sensor, so they go look for a high sensitivity sensor. It's not by accident that the noise is lower on the sensor. If you don't accept this concept of a designed product, then you will never be able to evaluate MFT cameras. And then the basic thing here, pixels capture photons and not the physical size of the sensor. Now the reason that they promote the size of the sensor idea is because they want to explain the capture more light sort of thing. And then the capture more light means higher dynamic range and less noise. This is so crazy to do that. We control the sensor with more light on the sensor, so that when we add more light, we increase the saturation of the sensor, and that gives us a higher dynamic range and lower noise level on the same sensor. So the same sensor can have different noise performances depending on how much light was on the sensor. It's got nothing to do with the size and the image circle and the area of the sensor. Pixels capture photons. People also have to reject any talking points not included in recognized calculations. So again, the size of the sensor capture more light, those variables are not included in the exposure formula. I explained it in one of my articles. So then I would reject that information. If you look at the noise is calculated by the formula with the photons to electrons graph. Sensor size is not part of that formula. So it's the formula for noise only looks at the read noise and the shot noise. So also reject any unconfirmed sensor dual gain or ISO invariance information. If you don't see any of these things, so sensor specification or what sensor they use, the Sony or Panasonic, if they don't list dual gain or if they don't list ISO invariance in a press release, then they didn't use it. They would have mentioned it if they thought it was important. So I wouldn't take any social media expert serious that start discussing any of these three things to try and explain a Micro Four Thirds sensor or camera. So you really have to accept a few basics like I listed here for you to be able to successfully evaluate the Micro Four Thirds camera. So guys, that is about it. I hope it helps. This is a lovely shot with my OM3. So have a good one until the next presentation. Thank you. Bye.